Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today we are just going to look at some strings, some concepts associated with strings. So strings in Java are not really considered a variable type, even though we established that early on in the course. We look at the idea that they're a variable type. Really, strings are a class. The only benefit that we have is that this class is a predefined class already built into the Java lang library. So the library that you use for all your other programs, without having to import any other types of libraries, that string is built into that java.lang library. That's the library that comes default with Java. And you can see down here in this paragraph here, it talks about the fact that strings are just a simple variable type where each character in the string is associated with an index, which is exactly the same as an array. And the reason it's the same as an array is that essentially a string is an array. It's just an array of characters. Other languages don't actually have a string variable type. You have to use a character array. So just to kind of look at what that looks like in kind of real life is if we have a string and it's the word hello. Essentially what happens with this string hello is that under each individual item inside of this string, each character has an index associated with it. And I'm just going to put the index kind of below this line here. So if we have this string hello, each character here is associated with an index that is associated with each character in the string. So the H is at the 0 index, the E is at the 1 index, the L is at the 2 index, and so on and so forth, all the way down the entire length of the string. So what that does for us is it allows us to reference each character individually within the string. And you're going to see how that kind of plays out when we look at some of the future methods that we can apply to strings in Java. So as I've said, strings are a class, and because they're a class, it gives us the opportunity to work with them in a specific way. And we have methods that allow us, string methods that allow us to work on the class. So it allows us to change things within the class. So it's not like working with a regular variable, because in a regular variable, you wouldn't have access to these types, to a lot of the methods that we have associated with strings, because if strings are a specific class. So let's just look at this first one here. I'm going to go through several, but we're just going to start with length. It's kind of the most basic one, and you can see here it returns the number of characters that are in a string. And then you can see the example. For each one of the methods that I'm talking to you about, I've given you the syntax with an example. So you can see here string phrase. So I've got a variable called phrase, and I've assigned the word hello into that string. Okay, so you can see here I've got the word hello, and right now that's stored in phrase. And then I just create a second variable called length. Okay, and then when I want to figure out how long a string is, it's simply going to be length equals phrase.length. So phrase is the string that I'm trying to do the method on. So what I want the method to actually perform that action on. And then dot, and then whatever method that I want to actually happen in. So in the end, this length, so that this variable here, this variable length here, length is going to return to us a value of 5. Okay, now one of the things you do have to take a look at though is if we look at the word hello and we look at the indexes associated with each one of these, because we always start our index at 0, the maximum index for this string is actually 4. Even though because the length is 5, we tend to think of it as, that the maximum index would be 5. But in fact, if you kind of look here, this idea is that the maximum index is 4 here. And that will be an important concept when you start working with strings, especially when you start working with strings and combining it with loops. And then the next method we're looking at here is the char at index. Um, so the char at command returns a character at a specific index of the string. So what if we know which digit in the string we want to look at, then we can return the character at that index. Now, one of the key things behind this is you have to keep in mind that it stores a character variable. So you have to make sure, or sorry, it returns a character variable. And that's important. It doesn't return a string. And that's why a lot of people actually prefer to use the substring method, and we'll look at that next. Um, but in the case of the char at method, you have to make sure that you're returning a string or a character variable. So you can see in this example here, I've got the string phrase again. I've assigned the values hello world to it, and then I've got the char letter. And then I say here, letter is equal to phrase.char at 6. So what I'm looking for is the sixth index of hello world. What character is at that? So if we were to write that below here, we could see hello, and then don't forget there's a space here, which is a character that's included, and then world. So if we were to look at all the indexes of this, we have to include the space as an index. You can see that in this hello world string, the the sixth index is the character W. Now it's a capital W as well, which is important to keep in mind. So letter, in the end, after this is all finished, letter is going to equal the capital W. And I should note that, in fact, this is not going to be a double quotation. It's going to be a single quotation, okay? Because that's what characters look like. Characters are always in single quotes. So in the end here, using the char at command, we return the character at a specific index, and in this case it returns the capital W because we've looked at the sixth index. Then uh, the next method we're looking at here is the substring method. Now this is very similar to the char at method. The only difference is you have the ability to return more than one character in a string, so in a substring. So you can see here that the substring method returns the portion of the string that starts with the start index. So whatever you dictate as the start index is the start of that string, and then the end of the string is whatever is at the end. You'll also see a second way to use the substring method here by just including a start index. It will return the portion of the string that starts at the start index and then goes to the end of the string. So if we look here again, I've created a string called phrase, I love summer, and then another string called small string. And that's just going to be the smaller string that we create using the substring method. And then here we go, small string equals phrase.substring 2 comma 5. So remember, 2 is what the start index is. So 2 is our starting index, and 5 is our ending index. So we only want the characters between index 2 and index 5. So in this first example, what we're going to end up with is we're going to end up with okay, so we've got this, and it says start at 2 and end at 5. So you can see we start at 2 and end at 5. That first statement is going to return the value love. Okay? Then in this second statement, we only give it a single parameter. So we're only telling it that we want a single value, which then means it refers to this, which means it takes whatever is at the 7 value and it just goes to the end of the string. So here it would look at whatever is here in this 7 value, and then everything that's in the rest of the string. So in this second thing here, we're going to end up with a return of the word summer. Okay, here we have methods that allow us to convert between the different cases. So you can see there's a 2 lowercase and a 2 uppercase, and it returns the entire string, all in upper or lowercase letters, depending on which one you want. So here's an example. I've got hello world. I've got another string called new phrase. New phrase equals phrase.to lowercase. So this will return everything as all lowercase letters, as though we typed it in. So you can see there's a capital H and a capital W here in the original string, but because we're going to lowercase, it converts everything to lowercase letters. The same thing happens with this new phrase here for uppercase. this is going to convert everything into uppercase letters. And this is often the way that matches happen when you're doing like email addresses and things like that. So if you're doing like a login screen, you'll often see them use two upper or two lowercase in order to, if you were to look at the coding behind those, often for the username or the email associated with it, they will actually use either two uppercase or two lowercase in order to make sure that the case doesn't matter. Now, with passwords, case almost always matters. You do have to watch with case and passwords, but for just the login and the user ID, sometimes they allow uppercase or lowercase. Now, keep in mind that we are always assigning a value back to another variable. You can see that in all the other assignments that we've done. Okay, you cannot just say this. You cannot just say the command phrase dot to lowercase. Okay, if you did that, you're not getting anything because there's nowhere for this to get stored. So this has to return a value somewhere. It has to return something somewhere, but in this case you can't because there's nothing here before the equal sign. There is no equal sign and there's nothing here to assign it to. So you have to make sure that your statements are written like this. If they're not, you're going to end up with a situation where you can't um, you're not getting the result that you want because you're not actually assigning it to a value. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is trim. Trim's pretty straightforward. It returns a copy of the string with all leading and trailing spaces deleted. So you can see here I've created a string, and in this case I've created the string with spaces at the front and at the end of the string. And then I've got new phrase. New phrase is equal to phrase.trim. And all this will do is just get rid of all of those leading and trailing spaces. It will not get rid of the spaces that are in the middle of the string. Those will still be there, so we still get that result there, but it gets rid of all of the ones that we had at the beginning here and at the end here. Next, we have the replace command, and you can see there's kind of two versions of the replace command, the replace first and the replace all. Replace first simply returns a string with the first occurrence of whatever you have here replaced with whatever you have here. Okay, so if you look at this example here, we've got hello big big world, and we have a new phrase. And I say new phrase is equal to phrase dot replace first big with small. So it takes the first instance of big and it's going to replace it with small. So if we look at this first example here, the first example is going to return hello small big world. Okay, because it only takes the first instance and it only replaces that first instance. It doesn't take all of them. So it finds the first instance of big, replaces it with the small that we told it to replace it with, and that's why we end up with hello small big world. Now, in the second example, when we look at this example, we say replace all. And in a replace all situation, now it's going to replace all instances of big with small. So in the end here, we have hello small world. So it takes both instances of the big and converts them to small. So we end up with hello small world rather than the hello big world that we had above. Okay, so replace first, replace all allows you to replace certain characters or certain words inside of a bigger word. Okay, think of the find and replace command in any code window or any Microsoft Word document. It's kind of the same idea. It takes and it looks for all the instances of the word big and replaces them. Because strings are classes, one of the things we have to keep in mind is that we don't have the ability to compare them in the same way that we compare other variable types. So normally we can compare variable types using an equal sign or a less than or a greater than sign or whatever we want. But with strings, because they're a class, we actually can't do this. The computer won't understand us trying to compare two things like that. So we have to have methods that allow us to compare strings back and forth. So we're just going to look at the basic ones for today. So the first one is the very simple one, and that is equals. So this method allows us to compare a string to another string. So here we go. String username, string correct name, and then a Boolean. Okay, because this returns a Boolean. It either returns true or false depending on whether the string matches or not. So if we say confirmed equal username dot equals correct name, this will return true if the username is the same as correct name. Okay, so if we said that username was equal to Fred, let's say, and correct name, okay, was equal to Fred, okay, then this would return true. Okay, this statement here would return true because both username and correct name are Fred. Okay, these are both Fred. Now keep in mind that case matters. So if instead we were comparing to this Fred, then we would not get a true. So in this case, we would end up with a false result because there's a capital F on the username Fred and there's a small f on the correct name Fred. Okay? Unless, of course, you use the equals ignore case. And in that case, these two things would match up. So Fred is basically is equal to Fred in this case because we are ignoring the case. Okay, so you have the ability to do equals ignore case if you want to ignore the case, but normally when you do a regular equals command, it actually checks to see if the case is the same as well. Okay, you can compare two strings, and with compared to, this would be a way that you would be able to find out how things are in alphabetical order. So using the compare to command, you get a numeric result depending on whether the string is greater than, equal to, or the same as um, the the uh, the string that you put inside the parameter. Okay, so you can see there's two versions of this as well. There's compare to, ignore case, and just straight compare to. So depending on whether you're worried about capitals or not, you're going to want to use the correct one. So again, if we have this exact same situation here where we have a username and a correct name and a result, you can notice here that instead of a Boolean, we're talking about a result. It's actually an integer value here. Okay, so this is actually going to give us a number. And you can see up here in the statement, we end up getting a 0 if the two strings are the same. We get -1 if um, if str is after the original string, and +1 if str is before the original. Okay, so let's look at how that might play out. So let's take some different values for username and correct name. So I'll call username here, okay, correct name here. And let's say that we're using these two statements to or this statement, sorry, to compare the two. So if our username is Bill and our correct name is Bill, then this will return a result of 0. This statement up here will return a result of 0 because they're exactly the same. Okay? If our username is Bill and our correct name is Casey, okay, then this is going to return a a positive integer or a +1, okay, because um, Bill is before Casey. Sorry, I knew I was going to get that wrong when I looked at it. Yeah, it's the other way around. It's negative because Bill is before Casey. Okay, so the str comes after. This is the string inside the brackets. Okay, this is correct name. So if correct name comes after, we get a negative value. And then if we have Bill, okay, and Abe, then we end up with a +1 because Abe ends up coming before Bill. And so this string is actually before Bill. Okay, now remember, case does matter. Okay, and the lowercase letters come before the uppercase letters. So again, this is a good way to kind of check for things in alphanumeric order or in alphabetical order. Okay, the next one is the index of command or last index of, and this it returns the index of a specific string inside of the string. If it's not found, you can see it returns a -1. So it tells us what index the actual string that we're looking for is inside of the original string. So let's say again, here we have hello big world. We've got an index and we got the last index. Index equals the phrase dot index of big. So what that's going to do is it's going to find the first instance of big because we're just using the regular index of. It's going to find the first index of big and it's going to report to us which integer index we are at. Okay, so in this case, it's going to return to us the value of index is going to be, again, we have to follow 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is going to return to us the value 6. Now, we can use the last index command. So if we use last index, what we're actually looking at here is the last index of this command of this word big. So in this case, we're looking at an index that's a lot further along. And in this case, we're going to end up with 10. And just to demonstrate why that is, okay, let's again look at and with the indexes underneath. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't forget the space. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 for the space, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, this is 17 is with this. Oh, I got off a bit there. Okay, so if you look here, we can see, if we're looking for the first instance of the word big, that starts at the index 6. And we can see that really clearly when we look at this in this way. And then we look at the last index of the word big, and you see that the word big starts in 10. Okay, and now for our last one, and that is the starts with. So if we want to find out if something starts with or ends with a specific string, we can use these two commands. And I'm just going to go straight into the example. You can see here, again, I've got hello big, big world, and I've got a start test, which is hello, and an end test, which is world. So there's also, I've created a Boolean result because this creates a Boolean value. So you can see I got a typo here. These should all be small r's. Okay, please ignore my typo. Okay, so phrase starts with start test. So what it does is it looks to see if start test starts with, if phrase starts with start test. So it looks to start test, that's hello, and we can see that it does work. So this is going to return a true result. Ends with end test. So we check to see if phrase ends with the word world, and it does. So this will also return true. But here we have result equals phrase dot starts with end test. So it's actually going to take this end test word world and it's going to see if our phrase starts with that. So this, it does not. So we end up with a false answer here. And then we do the same thing here, but in reverse. Check to see if our phrase ends with our start test, which we know it doesn't. So we end up with a false value here. Okay. So that's strings. Now I may try and show you some examples right in NetBeans in the upcoming videos. But for now, I think that should give you a good idea of how these different string variables work, and hopefully it gives you an idea of how to work through some of the assignments that I've assigned you. Okay. I know that was a bit of a long one, but hopefully it helps you kind of get through some of the concepts with strings. Okay. Thanks, guys.